Okay, so we have questions from yesterday, but if there are questions from now, we can ask them now. We can give the precedence. Okay, Attila.
Yeah, if you scroll up a little bit, both Paul and myself, we wrote some questions for today as well. Yeah, I was just wondering that FPGAs were mentioned already. I was just wondering about what other kinds of hardware you might have thought about of how to provide them later on. Let's see, what about AMD? I have no idea if they have anything similar to NVIDIA's vGPU setup.
I think the question is for Ricardo, mostly.
Yeah, so I mentioned just earlier, I don't know if anyone wants to add more, but for these vGPUs, virtualization of GPUs, NVIDIA is relying on SRAOV, which is this protocol that is more used in network accelerators, but actually both Intel and AMD support this way of integrating virtualization in GPUs.
Okay, yeah, I guess I missed that. Thanks.
Paul?
Yeah, so I was wondering about the interface between event processing frameworks and workflow management systems that are both trying to optimize CPU and non-CPU usage. Does this interplay exist, or are people thinking about how these two systems might talk to one another in the future? Because I guess the optimal throughput is only going to happen when you have optimal usage or interplay between the two things.
Who wants to answer? Mostly for Doug and Antonio.
I guess it depends on the workflow, because depending on what type of events you're processing, you know, is it physics events or is it reconstruction? Is it analysis events? By analysis events, I mean something that's already gone through a reconstruction system and you're trying to use it as inputs for some ML. So it really does depend on how what you're trying to do. And I would also say, even though that's a bit of a non-answer, to get the optimization right, the event processing frameworks will have to provide information that the workflow management frameworks can handle and then make choices on.
Right.
Because on some level, right, the idea is, especially at an HPC where I'm more comfortable with, it's units of work per allocation hour. And that can get a little bit tricky because there are ways that you can use certain types of running at an HPC where they don't charge you as much. But then you have to wait a very long time. For example, the biggest HPC centers give you a discount if you run on a large fraction of their machines at once. But we found at a busy place like NERSC, to get more throughput, it's better just to fill in the cracks and let it just suck things up like that.
So Doug, it was your comment on whole node processing optimization where I thought event processing frameworks might be the right tool to try and do that optimization, where they see the whole node and they don't have any latency for scheduling, or have a much lower latency for scheduling.
Right, but the one thing I'd point out there is CMS, and someone from CMS should comment, but I've heard from in a couple talks that they're finding that they can't, on a very large node, their multi-threaded framework peters out in its efficiency. if you were to take, let's say, all 56 nodes on a 56 core machine, they actually have to block it up in chunks also.
So if I can provide some input from CMS side on a different twist, let's say on the reply. So yeah, I agree on the previous point on having like I said, I try to emphasize this on my talk, to have resources and requests well defined. So we need these tags because matchmaking then will proceed by using these tags. So this is the first part. The second is that each job by itself, for example, may not use the entire node, but the good thing that we have in the CMS global pool is that it represents a unified pool of resources in which we then sorry, can run multiple types of requests simultaneously. So this is the good thing that we have in our pilots. So for example, in our pilots, we can already, even today for CPU, we can mix analysis jobs together with production jobs of different types, simulation, reconstruction, etc. So this is not in itself a problem for us. So in that sense, even requesting and getting whole nodes, including GPUs, for example, I trust, this is not tested yet, but I trust that we can extend the same type of functionality, right, to make use of the full amount of resources in a node in a partitionable way, so that the internal Condor machinery would do the partitioning of the resources, CPU, GPU, memory, etc., allocated to all the different requests from the jobs according to their classes. So in a sentence, let's say, I'm confident at this point that HT Condor matchmaking will help us in producing this partitioning and this allocation of multiple workflows into a single node, for example. Which, by the way, helps, and this is part of the answer as well, which, by the way, coming back to the main point, helps in the overall throughput and the overall efficiency in the utilization of the resources, at least from the, well, from the resource provider point of view. Yeah, they will see that these resources are full, even though they don't know that it's actually not a single job, but multiple jobs running at the same time in the machine, for example. Again, just like today, we do this on the grid.
So, Paul, does that answer the question, or do you think that there should be more at least more interaction between people working on different?
Yeah, I mean, I think so the answers were both good. I guess it sounds like there should be information available to the workflow management system about the event processing framework's capabilities, and then maybe, you know, making sure that you get enough data to the event processing framework such that it can actually make efficient use of a whole node. You know, this interplay between the two things sounds like it needs to be specified, which information is needed.
Yeah.
Could I maybe add something here?
Sure.
I just wonder if you also need information at the task level. Particularly, I think what would be very useful for the workload management system is knowing tasks which are elastic, in the sense that you could say, this is a task which can run on a GPU if you've got one, but it'll run quite happily on a CPU if you don't. And I think those kind of workflows are probably really important to maintaining our overall efficiency.
Yeah.
I agree as well, but this is all matter of a description of the tasks, I guess, and of the resources, because so far, well, while it's maybe my impression, but when we talk about GPUs, we only talk about a type of GPU. Particularly, we talk about NVIDIA, and you can see everywhere CUDA coding, CUDA scheduling, and this kind of stuff. But then, I mean, is this type of information about the type of GPUs something we want to look at? And are the frameworks going to be tied to a type of GPU? I think I'm not making much sense just because I'm trying to formulate the question from a site point of view.
Hi, this is Lucas. So I think, I mean, the crucial part is that just the language we use to kind of describe the workloads needs to be expressive enough to kind of be able to have those details in the job description, right? So if you take, for example, Kubernetes, right, you can kind of define like scalable workloads, right, where you can know, okay, you can scale it either on one CPU or 10 CPUs, and then you can adapt dynamically, right? And the same for resource consumption, so either like memory or CPU or things like that. You can also kind of describe the workload in a range of resources, and then it will kind of take up some space. So I'm not saying like we need to use Kubernetes everywhere. It's just an example of, you know, that you need this on the description side of the workload, because the user kind of knows like what the shape of their workload is.
And,
right?
and I can make a comment on the framework side.
Yeah.
So on the CMS side, certainly for multi-threading, the workload management system tells the job how many cores to use. And our workflow management system has an ability to scale it up and down within the pilot. So we may nominally say that this is an 8-core job throughout on the workflow, but when we land at a site, the pilot can override that and tell the framework, no, you get 4, or no, you get 12. Similarly, those type of interactions are very easy to deal with, even for GPUs. You could tell us to say, you get 4 GPUs for this process. You could say you could only have 1. And so those are other ways that communication can go on.
Yeah, but there are different GPUs, as far as I understand it, have also different features. And do we have to go down that level to describe these things? Because I can see it, for example, in Atlas, now that we have these few sites online, we have all configured them to work like as if it was a CPU workflow. So 1 GPU per job with a certain amount of memory. But in the future, and if we wanted to schedule more jobs per GPU because the GPU is not that much used, we want to do that too. I mean, for me, all these questions are still unanswered. And do we need more interaction between the WMS and the application frameworks to get better descriptions of these resources? I don't know if I'm making sense.
I think these mechanisms of communication through the layers, for example, we already have in CMS. So
Right.
as just described, the number of CPUs can change, for example, depending on when the job finds in the slot. So my understanding is that similarly, information could pass on through from the pilot itself, which has maybe found the resources or negotiated the resources. Okay, it can incorporate through this, for example, through this control auto discovery of the GPUs. It can incorporate not only the amount of GPU, but memory for the GPU, and other tags or the properties of the GPU. This information can be passed then from the underlying slot onto the job itself, if it's properly configured to do so. But I'm confident that this can happen. As I said, yeah, this is already happening. Already jobs are being able to adapt to the slot in which they land. So I don't see, at least in principle, a reason why this could not happen. Yeah.
if tomorrow, I'm not a CMS site, but if tomorrow I put online AMD GPUs, everything works like a charm.
Well,
Of course not.
Of course not. That's where I want to go.
But that's
No.
but that's no different than saying you put an ARM onto the system and expect us to immediately run on it too, right? I mean, we already face a little bit of this.
Actually.
It's like putting AMD CPUs, and in theory it should work. It's not like ARM.
Yes, it is. It's completely different. If you put an AMD GPU and you expect code written for an NVIDIA GPU to use it, it's something completely different. It's like you write code for a GPU and you expect it to run on a dishwasher.
Yes, and that's why I'm asking, shouldn't we have more interaction on what, I don't know, I have to do a procurement, for example, and I'm a bit annoyed that I have to buy a.
But Alessandra,
Yes.
so I think what you describe here is what we should be striving for, and this is definitely what we should be going towards.
Yeah.
And hopefully, once all of those portability technologies that Charles was talking about mature a bit, our frameworks will hopefully be smart enough that if the job management system tells the framework that, hey, you get an AMD GPU because, well, that's what I have, hopefully at one point our frameworks will be able to do something with this information. Right now they can't, but this should be the goal.
I will make one mention that the switch producer that Matti talked about in his talk is specifically designed to also be able to switch out different flavors of hardware. So when I say GPU, it could be a AMD or a Intel or NVIDIA. That same mechanism for CMS is designed to handle that if we have to specifically do it case by case.
What even at what granularity though? Can you, for instance, know that I've got a GPU that's got X amount of memory and has only got a NVIDIA compute power of 3.5 versus I've been given one that's got a compute power of 7? Why do I bring that up? Because that has different processing times.
Yes.
Yeah.
That has different processing times, and of course it's configured differently, and we have to know it before we broker or after. I mean.
So about the switch producer that Chris and Matti talked about, if you can check the availability of resources in Python, you can use the switch producer to decide to use them or not.
Okay.
And that's experiment agnostic code?
That's CMSSW code.
Can it be made, at least that library, agnostic?
Well, the mechanism.
Not really.
I mean, what the code does is checking if whatever you want is available, and then telling the CMS framework to use one module or another using its configuration language.
I mean, the implementation of the switch producer is pretty heavily built in the CMSSW framework. The general idea itself can be transferred, but the implementation is not really.
I mean, the general idea of kind of inspecting resource and adapting to what's there is, I mean, used elsewhere too, like in machine learning frameworks. Obviously, you can kind of introspect what devices are present and then dynamically switch. And we've seen this, for example, in our machine learning jobs on the grid, where if there's a GPU, it will be used. If not, like we'll just run on the CPU.
Yeah,
This is something you can do in many different ways. The approach CMS has chosen is tied explicitly to the requirement that the overall job configuration does not change whether you have a GPU or accelerator or not, because that is used to identify the product of the job, let's say. If you don't have this constraint, you can use a simpler approach where at runtime in any way, you make a check and you adjust your configuration accordingly.
But going back to the Doug's point, what kind of granularity would you need in terms of information about the GPU? Is it like AMD NVIDIA or the model or the CUDA version or driver version?
It all depends on how the code was compiled, because ultimately the decision here is what binary you're loading for us primarily.
Yeah,
So,
and these properties can be learned and understood by the slot, as I mentioned with this Condor GPU discovery. So, for example, I have this on my slides. I perhaps could not have or dedicated the time to explain this, but it's not only whether or not you have a GPU, but it's also several of these properties, like CUDA version, for example.
I think it's more than the binary, and the reason I say that is because since at some sites you really do have a time limit, you want to know from the workload management side, you want to be able to bind something that will fit in the time limit of the time you've been allocated a GPU. For instance, if I have a GPU that is low power and I only have 4 hours to run on it, I may have to choose a different workload than something that may take normally on the same GPU 20 hours of training time.
Yeah, and this is even more true if you decide to switch from GPU to CPUs, because you don't have if you don't have a GPU where your workload might run in 2 hours, you might take 15 running on the CPU. Scale as you please and combine with the batch system. So this information needs to be known by the WMS before brokering, I guess.
Yeah, I already mentioned this also in my slides. This variability of runtimes and how it indeed is a problem for the WM and for operations in general. But again, I was mentioning that somehow we are already dealing with that just with the dispersion in CPU power that we have in the pool. So
yeah,
it will only be increasing, but to a certain extent, it's a known problem somehow.
I don't know. I see the differences between V100 and K40, and one takes 8 hours, and the other has these tiny spikes. These in terms of CPUs, it's always hours. There is not this difference, this dramatic difference. The generations of the past 10 years of CPUs are much closer in terms of power than the GPUs.
Yeah, but we're already handling an intermediate different step. For example, we are already running with KNLs, and we know the different power and we know the different runtime. So in a way, we're already experiencing this issue, this problem. So what's the solution so far? Okay, we try to measure runtime, we try to scale somehow, if we can, with some type of benchmark, which attempts at predicting the runtime, etc. So again, it's an issue for sure, but perhaps we can try to deal with somehow the tools or the ideas that we already have, like benchmarking CPU power or benchmarking compute power according to the type of jobs that we run, etc. And then, of course, try to predict. And then, of course, validate as well when we are injecting these workflows, try to be as close as possible to the type of resources that we can find in the grid and try to predict from that the runtimes. I don't think we can do much better than that, probably.
I agree. It's where we are going as well with trying to apply the same type of reasoning that we do for CPUs, but to GPUs. But GPUs to me look a bit different.
Sorry, this is Simone. If I remember correctly, for example, in the example of the CMS online, there was something like 20% of the code that was meant to run on GPUs to cut even the cost. If this is the case, and if you can achieve this in offline, which I think is very challenging in the foreseeable years, even if a GPU would be infinitely fast with respect of another one, the total time of the job would still be dominated by the CPU. So you would be basically 20% off, even if one GPU is infinitely faster than the other, but the remaining 80% remains the same. So probably this in the next so many years is not a very serious problem. I think it's a bit more serious if you start having heterogeneous clusters with different mixtures of CPU and GPU flavors and they're not compatible. That could be a bit more complicated to schedule unless you have something like what Andrea was mentioning. So something that at runtime can load the right environment for the processes that you have to run.
Well, heterogeneous environments are something we are heading towards.
I think so. I mean, okay, right now, for example, at CERN, you have NVIDIA, but I doubt that sites will stick in the future with the same flavor of GPU, particularly over a long period of time. They might buy the same stuff the same year, but over different years, they might have something completely different.
Yeah, also because NVIDIA is making it very difficult to buy from there. Okay, so I think we are 15 minutes late. Unless there are any other urgent questions that are burning, I would close.
Ricardo added one question.
Yeah, okay.
It's not urgent, but it was just a quick. I'm interested because we actually when we buy GPUs, we have to also ask which kind of interconnects we request, and like PCIe seems to be enough. But is there any specific requirement for NVLink from the workloads? I guess that's no.
No.
Can I ask what you mean
It also
by...
depends which version of PCIe you're talking about, because the newer generation of GPUs are able to use PCIe 4, and the very, very few motherboards are out there which can support it. And there are several generations of NVLink as well. Obviously,
Right.
if you have a very memory-bound kernel, then the interconnect speed will play a huge factor.
Okay. Is there like a place where we can see what the requirements are for the workloads that already exist, or? We can follow this up later. It's not urgent either. As just curiosity, because in the tender you will have to, like, everyone will have to decide on this kind of thing as well.
I think that it's not, in many ways, it's not really worth looking at the current workloads, because I think a lot of them are going to change in the next few years. And you don't want to lock yourself into something which is a prototype right now in terms of the workload. I think you just want to look at the cost. I mean, NVLink is much more expensive than PCIe, but there's going to be a lot more hardware coming out with PCIe 4 this year. So I think that would probably be what you'd want to look at.
Okay,
when you say NVLink, do you mean the SXM2 for like TV100 or really the IBM Power version of the NVLink?
No, the V100.
Okay.
Okay, so I think it's time to leave it here. Thank you for joining, and I guess I'll see you, hopefully many of you, tomorrow as well.
Alessandro, sorry, if you have a minute, what do you mean with NVIDIA is making it very difficult to buy from them? Because since we plan to do that, if there are issues, it might be interesting to know them.
Because they force you for the data centers to buy you top range GPUs. which are okay, but they cost a fortune.
Okay, so it's not difficult, it's simply expensive.
It is expensive because of licenses. I mean, this thing that you can buy gamer GPUs only to do blockchain is extremely annoying.
Still, they make the product, so they decide how to sell it and for how much.
This is why I'm saying if we can move to other stuff, this becomes it becomes easier to buy more GPUs that you can all enjoy instead of that handful of top range GPUs that we are not even able to fill, and for which we have to buy a license to run more than one job on them.
You don't need a license to run more than one job.
Yeah, it's only if you do BGPUs. If you do PCI pass-through, there's no extra cost.
It was one of the things that the vendors told us, so I'm still investigating that.
I guarantee you, you don't need a license for running multiple jobs, even if they share a GPU with an MPS server.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been through this as well, and like we have several cases where we run multiple workloads on the same node. As long as you expose the full device, you're fine. And, yeah.
Okay, I believe you. I just had.
But I see your point about the license. Of course, it's simply a restriction to try and get people to buy maybe more expensive things that they need.
No, I have to go and buy the T4, which are compared to the 2080 Ti are crap, sorry. But I think we should close it here before we can talk maybe offline if you want.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.